person who committed, allegedly, these crimes, Lachenwall, had a gun put in his hand when he was a child by the CIA. Apparently, when he was 14 or 15, he was brought into the Zero Unit number 3 around Kandahar. The United States made this person into a child soldier and now is experiencing what I think is one of the most horrifically bright line cases of imperial blowback that we've seen throughout the war on terror. If the United States wants to find out whose culture is responsible for this horrific crime, it needs to start by knocking on doors at Langley.
I could not agree more with that take. Now, of course, for good reason, Americans are trying to understand the motivations behind the killing of a National Guard member, a young woman by the name of Sarah Beckstrom, and the shooting of another National Guard member who luckily survived, but has severe wounds as a result of this shooting that was carried out by a National Guard. I'm sorry, that was carried out by an Afghan national by the name of Ramanullah Lachenwall. Now, he has been charged with murder, rightfully so, and he will be brought to justice for his alleged acts here. He hasn't been convicted yet, so I have to say alleged. But before we get to the CIA angle, I just want to spend a little bit of time talking about the fact that a young woman, 20 years old, was shot and killed in Washington, D.C., robbed of her life. And we don't really know the full extent of the injuries that are suffered by the other National Guard member, Andrew Wolf. But, usually there's a quick knee-jerk reaction that becomes very political, and you have the two sides that fight each other. One side, almost it comes across as if people are trying to carry water for the person who carried out this disgusting act of violence. And I don't want anyone to think that I have any interest in doing that. What happened was an injustice, but what's important is to understand why it happened and how we can prevent it from happening again in the future. Was this individual vetted before he was allowed into the United States? We're gonna give you the details on that. What was the extent of his cooperation with the CIA as the war in Afghanistan was taking place? Why was he recruited when he was a kid, 15 years old? So we're gonna get to all of that. But first, your 2 cents, Cenk.
Yeah, so we've done how many billions of dollars in surveillance? It seems like we never catch the guy. I wonder if the surveillance is to catch terrorists or to catch us and monitor us. And then I wonder if this is productive or counterproductive. That's not a tough one. So if this guy really wanted to help the cause of Afghans or Muslims or immigrants, he could not have done anything worse or more counterproductive, which then makes me wonder, what was the true motive? And that's an interesting conversation.
Right, so usually when there's an act of violence like this carried out by a Muslim, you start seeing the headlines about how there's radical extremism in the country. And look, radical extremism exists, but so far we haven't seen any evidence to indicate that radical extremism is what motivated him to carry out this act of violence. But we do have a little more information about the impact that working with the CIA, especially as young as 15 years old, may have had on his mental health. That doesn't justify what he did, but it should maybe get the CIA and this country in general to rethink some of the military procedures that are deployed in various conflicts abroad. So with that in mind, per the Washington Post, Lachenwall was recruited into the CIA's Zero Unit at around 2011. So the unit's job was basically to perform counterterrorism missions in Afghanistan alongside US forces. Now, Lachenwall's squad was responsible for locating individuals affiliated with Al-Qaeda, who apparently we're very friendly with now, but nonetheless, Al-Qaeda and the Islamic State. Then the rest of his unit would essentially swoop in to kill the target. Now, there were Afghan interpreters and people working with our military who might not have really seen much violence, or maybe they saw minimal violence, but that was not the case when it came to Lachenwall. So according to the reporting here, official documents indicate that he's currently 29 years old, and 14 years ago in 2011, is when he was recruited by the CIA, meaning that he was just 15 years old when this happened. Now, he said Mick Mulroy, who is a retired Marine and CIA paramilitary officer who served with the Afghan teams, said of this CIA unit in which Lochinwall was working, they were in the heaviest fighting. It was almost every day. I don't think a 15-year-old's brain is able to cope with that much bloodshed, violence, slaughter. You get the picture. It's obviously going to have an impact on someone's brain. Now, the Taliban regained power immediately after the United States had withdrawn from Afghanistan in 2021. I'm going to give you some details about Lochinwall's, involvement in that, and more importantly, whether or not he was vetted properly before he was allowed into the United States. But before we do that, just a little bit of information from journalist Seth Harp about the zero units. Take a look.
Zero unit number 3 was the one apparently that he was assigned to, also known as the Kandahar Strike Force, which was headed by a U.S. ally, a warlord named Ahmad Wali Karzai, who the top drug lord in Afghanistan is a fair way to describe him. He ran, what's the zero units were basically U.S. proxy forces that operated at the direction of the CIA and the special forces in Afghanistan, and they primarily did what's called night raids, euphemistically known as night. They're more like assassination missions, and they were used extensively throughout the country to kill people that the U.S. intelligence suspected of being Taliban. Whether or not they actually were Taliban is quite a different matter. A lot of these proxy forces, proxy militias, in fact, practiced something called bacha bazi, which was a really despicable cultural practice where underage boys were trafficked and sold. All of this ugliness, the stuff that went on in the criminal client state that the U.S. American national security objectives in Afghanistan, the Kandahar Strike Force that he served in was in the middle of all of it. There's more stuff to it than that as well.
Yeah, that's pretty horrific stuff. Now, by the way, one other note about the, we're fighting Al Qaeda and all of that. What's really amazing is that while we were fighting Al Qaeda, when it came to Syria, the US was arming Al Qaeda in order to destabilize the country and overthrow Bashar al-Assad. And in an email exchange with Hillary Clinton, Jake Sullivan made abundantly clear that Al Qaeda is on our team when it comes to Syria. They're the good guys when it comes to Syria. It's just so disgusting. Anyway, but let me move on. So as I mentioned, the Taliban gained power immediately after the US withdrew from the country back in 2021. But as the US was withdrawing, Lochinwall and his unit specifically was the one to secure the Kabul airport, which is laughable because it wasn't secure, as we all know. We had troops that lost their lives as a result of the withdrawal and how incredibly messy it was, poorly planned. But Lochinwall, in addition to his earlier vetting to join the zero units, underwent extensive vetting by US counterterrorism authorities, including the CIA and the National Counterterrorism Center, before entering the United States, according to people with direct knowledge of the case. So look, it is very important to bring this guy to justice, 100%. But we also have to take a look at what the United States military, the CIA, what they're engaging in. Because to be honest with you, I don't trust the CIA in vetting anything. The CIA can't even keep members of our National Guard, safe in Washington freaking DC. So I'm curious what you think, Cenk, because the CIA is the very government agency, the intelligence agency, that decided to recruit a freaking 15-year-old to engage in counterterrorism missions.
Yeah. So, look, first of all, Chris Cuomo came after me today for talking about some other case. I don't even remember which case. He said, well, yeah, how come you're not talking about this guy? Where's the question? So a guy goes and kills one member of the National Guard, terribly injures the other. So the guy's a terrible guy and it's a terrible act. Where's the question, right? So, okay, so that's obvious. It's reprehensible. The only question then that results from that is, Why did it happen? So that we could prevent it from happening, as Anna alluded to, right? So now, in his case, probably the most likely answer is what the papers are reporting, which is that he had a very rough time adjusting here because he mainly killed people for a living, right? And now he had a lot of respect and money because of that position in Afghanistan. He comes here, has no respect or money, no ability to get a job because he got asylum, but he had a very limited work permit, so he couldn't get a job. He had menial jobs, couldn't take care of his family. So all these, he had a fight with his brother, etc. So is that it? Probably. And so that's a tough one to be able to counteract. And I suppose like a better transition process, etc., for folks who helped our country in other wars and we made promises to, etc. But overall, like if that's why it happened, there's not much you could do about randos who, then lose it, etc. I mean, if you're like, there's this idea out by some of the people who hate Muslims that somehow like this is like a pro-Islam thing. Are you insane? Nothing hurts the Muslim community more than this. So the people who are hurt most are obviously the victims, the National Guard who got shot. But I would say after them, and well after them because they're the ones who actually literally got hurt. But after them is Muslim Americans and immigrants and Afghans, because those are the guys who now everybody's going to take it out on, right? So if
can we just not recruit child soldiers? Can we do that? Obviously, there was a deal made here, okay? And the deal is, hey, 15-year-old, work with us, and eventually, when this war is over, you get entry to the United States. How about we don't do that?
Yeah, no, there's no way
Am I
they're not gonna do
asking
that.
too much? Am I asking too much? How about we don't employ child soldiers?
Yeah, I honestly, I don't know what the CIA is good for.
Nothing.
So I know that they're supposed to be secret and stuff, but I mean, like in the history books, I've never heard of our CIA ever helping America, ever. All I hear is story after story about, a coup against a democratically elected person because the banana company wanted it, the oil company wanted it. The CIA doesn't even work for us. They work for the multinational corporations that fund our politicians. So now they have child soldiers in Afghanistan and that blew up in our face. Nobody could have seen that coming, right? And look, the guy worked with the CIA. So it does make me wonder, I mean, this deeply counterproductive thing to the Muslim American community happens when, boy, some forces really wanted it. Like, God, it's so well timed to be able to say the Muslims, the immigrants, all these things, right? And so now we have it. Congratulations, CIA. I don't know what happened there, but I do like most likely answer is he was disgruntled with how life was going. Okay, but either way, hold on, Anna. One last thing. Either way, whether they plucked him as a child soldier and poisoned his mind, and then all he knows is how to kill, and then we bring him here and then he kills people, or the CIA put him up to, which is less likely. Either way, it's definitely the CIA's fault. And you chalk up another disaster from the most toxic organization in the history of the country.
In January of 2024, a volunteer wrote the following email. So he had a bunch of jobs. So let's go to graphic 4. He held jobs for brief periods and hosted gatherings at his home, the volunteer said. But by 2023, he began isolating himself and appeared defeated by the challenges of finding steady work and adapting to life in the United States. Let me just note, plenty of Americans are struggling in the United States, and they don't carry out acts of violence like murder as a result of that. But in January of 2024, the volunteer wrote the following in an email. Quote, he spends most of his time in his darkened bedroom, not speaking to anyone, not even his wife and older kids. I personally believe that he's suffering from both PTSD and from his work with the US military in Afghanistan. 15-year-olds, minors, are not suited to see that level of death and destruction, to actually take part in it, which is what he was doing at the behest of the CIA. Now, I just want to note some other things real quick. So the Washington Post also reported that Lachenwall had refused many of the entry-level jobs available to him as a recent immigrant. but the Post did not explain what those jobs were, nor did they explain why he refused. On November 26th, Lachenwall allegedly shot the National Guard members, killing one of them, Sarah Beckstrom. Beckstrom was killed. Wolf is recovering from severe injuries. But notably, the shooting took place. This is important. The shooting took place just 2 blocks from the White House. You would assume that that area is just flooded with law enforcement, right? That flooded with members of the intelligence community, Secret Service. But friend of the show, Ken Klippenstein, referred to the location as the most heavily surveilled and guarded place on earth. He argues the suspect is a textbook profile of the very kind of attacker this sprawling, multi-billion-dollar national and homeland security apparatus is supposed to catch. And then he goes on to list the institutions that failed to prevent the shooting. That includes the Capitol Police, the CIA, the FBI, the National Counterterrorism Center, the NSA, the Secret Service. And I want to repeat, this is not to take the blame away from the guy who carried out the act of violence. But if we want to ask ourselves, how was he able to do that? What can we do to prevent it from happening in the future? Maybe we should question all of those 3-letter government agencies our taxpayer dollars go toward, yet they fail to keep us safe time and time again. Anyway, that's meanwhile, you have Kristi Noem and others exploiting the situation to be even more restrictive when it comes to immigration, which is par for the course. But that's all I have on this.
Yeah, and she uses terrible words as Trump does, everybody does. So, all right, guys, 2 things about it. So surveillance. We're told we have to give multi-billion-dollar contract after contract after contract. And then if anyone that's bothering the powerful does anything wrong, oh, look at this, we found this new piece of evidence, right? And everybody's being surveilled and everybody's being monitored. But golly gee, CIA-trained terrorists are the only ones that could escape that dragnet. So if the surveillance never catches the terrorists, what's the surveillance for? That's a good question. That question will never be asked in Washington, where they'll just sign a blank check over to Palantir and other places, other companies that will then use it to terrorize us and to never actually protect us. And guys, there's differences. The FBI catches a lot of bad guys. They do things that are wrong too, but at least we've shown on this show dozens of times, hey, look, FBI actually stopped that plot. Nice job, FBI, okay? The CIA, I don't know what they're good for at all. So which leads to the second point. So everybody has a bunch of different parts of their identity, right? And people use those different parts whenever they want to make a political point. So this guy was, for example, male. He was Afghan, he was young, he was Muslim, he was an immigrant, and he was CIA trained. Okay, so what has our politicians and our media decided to focus on? Not the young male part, which is what is the connective tissue to almost every single mass shooter. Not the guns, that's not connective tissue, not any of that, right? No, Afghan, Muslim, immigrant, attack. It's because of that. Now, do you think it's more likely that he did this because he's an Afghan and all Afghans are wild-eyed terrorists? Or is it more likely that the part of his identity that mattered the most in this shooting was that he was trained by the CIA to murder people at the age of 15? I would argue the CIA training is the most relevant part of his identity as it regards to this shooting. But all of American media and all of American politicians disagree. They go, the Muslim. Remember, you have to hate all of them because hating other people that didn't do this somehow will prevent this. By the way, if you said it about any other religion, of course, everyone would be horrified, right? You say it about Muslims, everybody's like, yeah, it's the Muslims. No, they're lying to you. And they're doing it so that the Palantirs of the world can rob you blind, the CIA can screw you over, and they could do God knows what with our national treasure. Every time you ring the bell below, an angel gets his wings. Totally not true, but it does keep you updated on our live shows.